Have you ever wondered why such a huge part of humanity stays poor even though they work so hard? Why after every crisis, the same people get richer while the same crowds get poorer? What if I told you poverty isn't actually an accident? What if I told you this system was designed to work exactly like this? Is poverty really destiny? Many people treat being broke as a personal failure. If only I worked harder, made better choices, started earlier. But the truth is far more tragic, because history shows us this. Poverty is often not the result of individual mistakes, but of systematic decisions. And those decisions are most often shaped by governments and their financial policies. Throughout human history, poverty was never distributed randomly. Since ancient times, those in power discovered that one of the most effective ways to govern society is economic dependence. Taxes, debt, currencies, and crises. None of these are merely technical details. They are instruments of power. In the modern world, this has become even more invisible. No one openly says, "Let's make people poorer." But certain decisions quietly drain the purchasing power of millions, without them even noticing. Inflation rises while wages stay the same. Taxes increase while social support is reduced. Money is created, but it doesn't spread equally. The first to reach it are almost always the same: banks, large corporations, and lending institutions. Governments often borrow to cover budget deficits, and the interest on that debt is paid with taxes collected from the public. So citizens don't just pay for today. They also pay the price of wrong decisions made in the past. At that point, poverty stops being a situation and turns into a cycle that keeps repeating. And here's the most striking part: economic crises are rarely a surprise. Most crises happen because risks that were known for years get postponed. But when the crisis finally hits, the people who pay the price are always the same: those who lose their jobs, those who fall into debt, those whose savings melt away. Meanwhile, certain groups manage to grow even during crisis periods, because the system is built to protect them from danger. That's why we have to ask a simple question. If being broke is so widespread, is everyone really making the same mistakes? Or is the problem in the rules of the game? In this series, we will examine step by step how poverty is produced, how governments use financial tools, and why this order is presented to people as natural, because without understanding and accepting one core reality, it's almost impossible to find a solution. Being broke is often an outcome, and behind that outcome, contrary to what we're told, there aren't random twists of fate. There are planned financial games. When a country's central bank prints money, it initially sounds like a solution that should ease the economy. Money is being created, the economy will recover. Everyone will breathe again. But in practice, it changes very little in the daily lives of most people. In fact, the opposite usually happens. Prices rise, purchasing power falls, and people feel poorer. So if money is truly being created, why doesn't it reach the public? The answer lies in how that money is created and who receives it first. In modern economies, newly created money does not go directly into citizens' pockets. It first flows to banks, financial institutions, and large corporations. Governments sell bonds to stimulate the market. Banks buy those bonds. And central banks provide low-interest liquidity to banks. In other words, new money enters the system from the very top of the chain. At this point, a critical reality appears. Those who access the money first can use it in the most advantageous way. Large corporations invest with cheap credit, buy assets, and push stock prices higher. Meanwhile, before salaried workers ever see that money, prices start to rise. Rents increase, food becomes more expensive, energy bills grow heavier. Meeting basic needs becomes harder. As a result, the money that supposedly exists in the economy feels invisible to ordinary people. Economists call this the distribution effect of money. Newly created money does not affect everyone equally. On the contrary, it widens income and wealth inequality. Inflation hits fixed income earners the hardest. Wages rise slowly, but prices rise quickly. The gap turns into a silent transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich, happening without open acknowledgement. Governments usually explain this process as necessary, claim there is no other way to save the economy. But when the same method is repeated over and over, it becomes an economic habit. Borrow, print money, accept inflation. And as long as this cycle is not broken, poverty within society becomes chronic. Because what keeps this system alive is not production, but debt. The real problem is this: printing money may offer short-term relief, but in the long run, the people pay the price. Taxes increase, purchasing power falls, savings evaporate. People work more but can buy less. Over time, this condition becomes accepted as normal. That is why poverty often stops being a personal failure and becomes a natural outcome of the system itself. The money exists, but its direction is clear, and that direction usually moves not toward the people's pockets, but toward the center of the system. In the next section, we will discuss this question: why debt has become one of the most powerful weapons of modern states, and why indebted societies are far easier to control. Debt in the modern world is not just an economic tool. It is also a powerful mechanism of control. As governments, corporations, and individuals continue to borrow, the system keeps running. But the real power of debt lies in the obligation to repay it. Because debt mortgages the future in advance. People spend money they have not yet earned, and governments make promises before they have collected the resources to fulfill them. Modern states often balance their budgets not through taxes, but through borrowing. Bonds are issued, funds are raised from international markets, and debt is constantly rolled over. The interest on this debt is paid over many years. But who actually pays it? The taxpayers. In other words, those who make the decisions and those who pay the price are often not the same. The decision makers change, but the burden remains on the public. As borrowing increases, governments lose room to maneuver. A significant portion of the budget goes to interest payments. Education, healthcare, and social support are pushed into the background. States turn to austerity policies, often described as tightening the belt. Wages are suppressed, taxes are increased, public spending is cut. All of this is done in the name of restoring market confidence. But once again, the cost of that confidence is paid by the people. For individuals, the picture is similar. Credit cards, personal loans, mortgages, and student debt. Debt may seem to make life easier, but it also ties people tightly to the system. A person in debt cannot easily take risks, quit a job, or speak out. There are monthly payments to be made. That is why debt is not only an economic tool, but also a psychological one. As society becomes more indebted, it becomes more obedient. A debt-based society wants stability and fears change. It avoids uncertainty and resists disruption. For decision makers, this is a major advantage. Debt quiets people. It delays reaction. The message of just endure a little longer is more easily accepted when debt is involved. That is why there is such a strong connection between poverty and debt. The system is not designed to make everyone rich, but it benefits from keeping everyone indebted. Because debt is the most invisible, yet the most effective handcuff of the modern world. In the next section, we will examine how this system is sustained and how debt and taxes together are used as a mechanism of pressure. If debt is a powerful tool in the hands of governments, then taxes are the fuel that keeps that tool running. When the two work together, the system functions almost flawlessly. Governments borrow money, then use taxes to pay both the interest and the principal of that debt. Most citizens continue their daily lives without even realizing they are part of this cycle. Yet every price hike, every new tax category, and every deduction is a reflection of debts taken in the past and pushed into the present. In theory, taxes are collected for shared social needs, education, healthcare, security, infrastructure. But in practice, a significant portion of this revenue is absorbed by debt repayments. This means citizens are paying for a value that was never created for them in the first place. Over time, this creates a growing sense of injustice. People expect better services as they pay more taxes, yet often experience the opposite. When questioned, this is usually explained away with phrases like budget discipline. At this point, the invisibility of taxes becomes critical. Income taxes are deducted before wages even reach people's hands. Indirect taxes are hidden inside grocery receipts. Fuel, energy, communication, taxes are everywhere. But no one sees the total clearly. This invisibility reduces resistance. When people don't know how much they are paying, they also don't know what to object to. When taxes and debt work together, they also shape behavior. Consumption taxes steer people towards certain habits. Incentives make specific investments attractive. But this guidance is not always in the public's interest. Sometimes it exists simply to keep the budget alive. The goal is not prosperity, but continuity. The most critical question is whether this system is sustainable. As debt grows, taxes increase. As taxes rise, purchasing power falls. As purchasing power falls, the economy slows. When the economy slows, the state borrows again. And so a vicious cycle forms. As long as this cycle remains unbroken, poverty stops being a temporary condition and becomes a permanent one. That is why poverty is not an accident. Taxes and debt work together to sustain this system, while most people continue living their lives without realizing they are standing at the very center of the game. Economic crises are usually described as natural disasters, as if they are sudden events that no one could have predicted. Yet when we look a little closer at reality, it becomes clear that most crises are not surprises at all. The risks are often known in advance, warnings can be made, and solutions can be proposed. Still, intervention is delayed, because crises do not mean destruction for everyone. On the contrary, for some, they represent enormous opportunities. During crisis periods, the first to suffer are always fixed-income groups. Unemployment rises, wages are suppressed, small businesses shut down. People spend their savings, fall into debt, or are forced to sell what they own. It is precisely at this moment that the powerful step in. Large corporations, investment funds, and asset holders see crises as discount seasons, rapidly acquiring devalued companies, land, homes, and stocks. Governments sometimes use crises as a lever as well. Decisions that would provoke strong backlash in normal times are presented as necessary during emergencies. Social spending is cut. Privatizations are pushed through. Working conditions are loosened. The public, fearing that things could get even worse, often accepts these measures in silence. In this sense, a crisis is not a time of resistance, but a time when acceptance increases. From the perspective of the financial system, crises are one of the most effective ways to pass the cost of mistakes downward. Poor investments, excessive borrowing, and risky policies are usually made at the top. But the burden is spread across society, making it easier to absorb. Inflation rises, taxes increase, public services shrink. In this way, the system cleanses itself. But this cleansing does not remove the strong. It erases the weak. That is why it is essential to look at the picture after a crisis. Who became richer? Who disappeared from the market? Who fell into debt? And who accumulated assets? The answers are rarely surprising. The same names, the same groups, the same centers of power. Because the system is not designed to completely prevent crises, but to manage them. This is one of the clearest signs that poverty is not an accident. If the same groups win after every crisis, the problem is not with individuals, but with the system itself. And that system reproduces itself through crises. In the next and final section, we will discuss whether this cycle can be broken, what individuals can realistically do in the face of this system, and whether poverty is truly fate or a condition people are deliberately pushed into. After seeing this entire picture, the most natural question arises. If poverty is not an accident, can this system be changed? Or is everyone forced to live inside the same cycle, inevitably repeating it? The truth is that the system is designed to make individuals feel powerless. But that does not mean individuals are completely powerless. First, one thing must be accepted. This system will not change overnight. Poverty, debt, taxation, and crises are financial mechanisms built over decades. But history also shows us this. No system operates the same way forever. As societies become more aware, as demands grow more conscious, and as transparency is increasingly demanded, shifts in balance become unavoidable. For individuals, the first step is awareness. Realizing that poverty is not caused solely by personal failure reduces misplaced guilt and allows the right questions to be asked. Asking, "How can I earn more?" matters, but asking, "Why does this system work this way?" matters just as much. Because once questioning begins, blind acceptance ends. The second step is knowledge. Financial literacy is not a luxury in this system. It is a form of self-defense. A society that understands how debt works, who benefits from inflation, and how taxes are structured is far harder to manipulate. Knowledge may not make people wealthy, but it slows down their impoverishment, and that alone can make a significant difference. The third step is collective demand. Throughout history, no economic right was gained through individual silence. Working hours, social security, minimum wages, retirement systems, none of these emerged by chance. They were achieved through social pressure. Poverty, then, is not destiny, but it becomes permanent if it is not challenged. Governments play financial games because the system allows them to. When transparency is not demanded, when accountability is avoided, and when the phrase, "there is no alternative," goes unquestioned, these games continue. But as public awareness grows, the space for these practices narrows. In conclusion, this must be stated clearly. Poverty is not an accident, but it is not unchangeable either. This system survives based on what people are willing to tolerate. If people focus only on survival, the system exploits that. But when people begin to understand, question, and demand, the balance shifts. Not everyone will become rich, but everyone can live in a more just system, and that will not happen through generosity from those in power. It will happen through collective awareness. That is why these stories must be told, because real power does not belong to those who own money, but to those who understand the truth.